So today, we're joined by the legendary Diane Foreman, business heavyweight, ice cream exporter extraordinaire, and proof that you can go from secretary to CEO, even in heels and a bit of lippy. Diane's built global empires, smashed stereotypes, and isn't shy about telling it how it is. In this episode, we'll discuss her take on women in business, the challenges that still exist, and why leaving the ladder down is non-negotiable. We'll dive into the power of perception, whether men and women really do business differently, and her views on that age-old question, can women really have it all? Sharp, witty, and full of insight, this is Diane Foreman. Welcome, Diane, to the brink. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So
great, thank you. What an intro. Good to see you guys.
You are an absolute legend of New Zealand business, and it's a privilege. Oh, you are, and it's a privilege to have you on here. But we were doing some research, and I had no idea that you started with a young family. You sort of came from pretty much nothing. That's correct, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it would have been really hard back then too, because the glass ceiling was it was up in the moon, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah, it's very different than it is today. But of course, it sounds better than it. Well, it sounds different and harder than it actually was, because I was really fortunate that I was a secretary. I worked in a medical practice, and one of the patients was a guy called Bill Foreman, and Bill and I ended up getting married. And so I was basically helicoptered into the C-suite, at a very, very young age, because I married a guy that happened to own his own business. And Bill had total belief in me. And very quickly I became a director, and then I became part of the senior management team, and then I took over running the business. So, it was a very unusual set of circumstances that took me from secretary and medical practice to running a global company.
Yeah, that's like
Diane. You mentioned your former husband Bill, and that start you had in business. Before that, you had worked multiple jobs, and I've heard you speak about the importance of selling time, which is what not the importance of selling time, but
of not
selling time versus what you later got into, which was entrepreneurship. Can you sort of speak a bit to that?
Sure. I really believe that people make this huge mistake by, if I had come from money, or if I had had parents that could afford an education, I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, but my parents were very poor. They didn't believe in education for girls. They thought that all girls needed was straight teeth and the ability to type. And from that, you were going to marry a nice man, end up in Glenfield with a picket fence. And that kind of almost happened to me, because my first husband, I married very young. We had 2 children before I was 20, and I ended up behind a picket fence in Mairangi Bay. So I was headed in that direction, exactly as my parents prophesied it. But the fact that my marriage ended, I met Bill, my life changed. I was incredibly fortunate that I hadn't been a doctor or a lawyer, because all I would have ever done was sell time. Because when you're in the professions, that's all you've ever got to sell. And when your career comes to an end, you don't have a business to sell. You're just nothing. I've got a really dear friend who's just retiring as a fantastic surgeon this week, but it's the end for her. She doesn't have anything to sell. She just gives one of her colleagues her desk. Whereas in a career like entrepreneurship, you're building, and then you're selling your product along the way, hopefully profitably, and then you get to sell your business. Hey, that's a whole nother can of joy.
That's, that's so true, because obviously, surgeons, doctors, dentists, while they're working, they're making seriously good coin, right?
Good money.
Like if you're a surgeon, you're making seriously good coin. But if you take two or three weeks off, or 6 weeks off, or you take your family over to Europe, you're not getting paid. And
of course that's the problem. And there's no real succession planning in that. I mean, I can think of a couple of ophthalmological practices that have done a much better job of bringing in young doctors, and there is something, but that's a whole new concept. And you think about most legal firms, you think about entrepreneurial services companies, they all have to retire at 60 to allow the next generation to come through, whereas that's because they're selling time. But when you are an entrepreneur, you are just selling yourself, selling your products, and selling your ability. But this whole great thing where you get to sell all the things you've built up being your business. So
exactly.
I'm forever grateful that I had poor parents, I had no education, I didn't become a professional, and I got the chance to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So what do you think about education? Because, you know, like it hasn't really changed for eons. And, you know, back in my day, and Diane, you're probably not much older than me, but back in my day, we were all encouraged.
A lot older, I think. But
I doubt it. But anyway, we were all encouraged, like, you've got to get an education, you've got to go to university, you've got to get a degree, you have to become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, whatever. But it's still kind of like that nowadays. Like, nothing's really changed. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I find it really sad, and I'm guilty of that too. I have 4 children. 3 of them have got, you know, they've all got master's degrees. They're all very academically sound and savvy, but none of them are interested in business. And I think that's really sad. So despite having such a business family and having business discussed every day, all day, it's made no impact on them. So they've wanted to have education, and they're the first people in my family that have ever been to university. So it's really strange because I obviously encouraged my children into academia because I didn't do it, but I don't think I did a good job of selling them into business because they're much more interested in the caring professions.
That's interesting. That brings me to the question, entrepreneurship, that streak, do you think that's something that's innate in people, or is it something that's learned, or is it fostered? Because I know you've spoken about the fact that you've always had it in you, but you didn't necessarily recognize it until you met Bill. Is that a correct analysis?
Well, way back then, you know, we're talking 40 odd years ago when I met Bill, we didn't probably even talk about entrepreneurship very much. We were just plastic bag manufacturers. So I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. So I didn't kind of get up and think, wow, I'm doing something cool because I'm an entrepreneur. I got up thinking I'm learning how to make plastic bags. And I now need to learn how to make plastic bags in the US or Singapore or somewhere else. So it was only after we sold Trigon that I realized that I had entrepreneurship in my genes. And I'm adopted, so it's really hard to say whether it was in my DNA. But once we sold Trigon, we'd made enough money that we could have retired and sat on the beach forever. But I had this just burning desire inside me to prove that I could do it on my own. Because everyone always said, oh, you know, Diane only did it because Bill put her in the C-suite. But I knew that wasn't true, and he knew it wasn't true. So he said to me, you take the whole proceeds from the Trigon sale and turn it into something. And that's unbelievable belief because I could do that now. And, you know, if someone came into my life, there's no way I'd say, well, take my fortune and good luck. So that is it in me? I think it must have been because I had a burning desire to prove that I could do it on my own.
Yeah.
And do you think it took somebody like Bill to see that in you, or was it something that you sort of awakened to yourself?
I think Bill saw it in me. I always knew that I wanted to sell stuff. When I was a little girl, I kept chickens and sold the eggs. When I was 14, I started a babysitting circle. And, you know, rather than just babysit, I got the girls from school to babysit, and I contracted them out to all the neighbours and took a cut. So when I look back at things like that, I think, yeah, I was always trying to see the angles, see the game. But you don't think of that then?
I've heard you mention that as an entrepreneur, you need to have a particularly high threshold or appetite for risk.
Yes.
And I don't think everybody necessarily has that. I don't think that I necessarily do. An appetite for feeling uncomfortable is how I think you described it, and figuring out what's the worst thing that possibly can happen, and can I live with that?
Yeah, that's not an original thought from me. Craig Heatley, who I think is one of New Zealand's most incredible entrepreneurs, told me that. And he said from a very young age, he always used to go into any situation, personal, private, golf, anything, and think, God, what is the worst thing that can happen? And if he could handle that, then he'd go ahead with it. And once he gave me that bit of advice, I've used it to the nth, and I use it all the time. And I think that's an entrepreneur needs that attitude. But, you know, if you can't live with the worst thing that could happen, then don't do it. And not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone's cut out to be a sports person or a whatever. You know, there's a particular thing in you that has a passion.
Yeah, and being able to handle that risk, because there's a lot of people, like I always say to people, you know, like, you know, why don't you get into business? Why don't you work for yourself? And they're like, well, you know, like they just love the security of a steady income. You know, and there's a lot of people that are like that, and I get that, because there is that fear that, you know, like a lot of people don't have the courage to go, well, you know, like if this fails, what am I going to do? You know?
Yeah. But that's knowing that you can live with the downside of risk.
Yeah.
You know, if this fails, I can live with that. And for me, of course, it didn't actually ever matter, because I could never be poorer than I was to begin with. Nothing
Exactly.
could be worse than being a solo mum, having to work waitressing jobs and, you know, 3 jobs to keep your family. So I knew it could never be that bad. So, but the interesting thing, as I've got older, I've become risk averse, which is really sad for an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Why do you
think the same? That's so funny that you say that, because that's I'm the same. Like you sort of get, you know, like, and obviously I don't have a pot like you have, but you get super you get kind of like, and you it's so strange. It's so strange.
It's weird, because all my life I've been prepared to risk, but I've noticed in the last 5 or 10 years I haven't done anything new entrepreneurially, because I think, God, this pot's all I've got. You know, this has got to last me till the end. And because none of us, you know, none of us have got an expiry date on our feet, so we don't know when we're out. So you think, wow, you know, if I go and do this crazy thing today, I feel like I've hunkered down much more as I've got older, and I don't have that same appetite. And it's a shame, because I'm not having as much fun.
Do you think so interesting, man? Like, it's just so bizarre.
You relate to that, man?
I so relate to that. You know, like, and I look at myself and I go, "Oh, you pussy," you know. But
I do
like,
too.
It's like and you're always having these conversations with yourself. It's like, oh, come on, mate. Like, you know, like, what are you worried about? Like, but I guess I worry about things like, I've got 2 young kids. You know, once I get them out, but once they're out the gate, I'm 108.
It's right. Well, I'm kind of, you know, in a funny way, kind of, I'm the same, because I think, you know, I've got 4 children, I've got 5 grandchildren. At the end of the day, I feel like it's all on my back. It's not, but I feel like it is, even though they're, you know, well-equipped young people having good lives. And so I'm scared to risk. I'm kind of hanging on to it. But I also think that entrepreneurship and starting businesses and creating enterprise is the most fun you can have. So I'm sad that I'm not in there doing that now.
Yeah.
But I think it's old lady.
I think it would be remiss before we proceed not to share a couple of Diane's achievements, and there are many. So if we were to sit down and go through them all, would be
like I said to Ringo this morning, I said, we can't read that list out. It's like it's pages and pages.
It is literally pages.
I only wish that was true.
I think so many people know of you, have heard of you, and many of the things you've achieved in your life, but some will not have. So I thought, you know, I'll go through a couple before getting into some of the other things I'd like to talk about. Obviously, you've referenced Trigon, which you helped secure the sale of in '96, and that was, what, $130 million, which is an enormous amount of money. Now,
heaps.
And,
that'd be
back then,
that'd be almost like $500 million, would it? Now it'd be close, wouldn't it?
It would be. Yeah.
I think so.
It was a big deal. Yeah. Back then, it was a huge deal. I think it was one of the biggest private companies sold in New Zealand at the time, but we're more than 30 years ago now.
Yeah, well, do you remember, like, I remember back then, you could buy a house in Remuera in the best part of Remuera for a couple of $1 million. That was the most expensive house in Remuera, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I married my first husband, we paid $30,000 for our first home.
Yeah.
So that puts everything in. It wasn't in Remuera, though, I have to say.
No,
but that puts everything in context. Yeah.
It sure does.
So $130 million deal back then was big. And the fact that we did it with an American company, because, you know, that was big too, to negotiate a deal with an offshore entity without email, without iPads, without any of the stuff that we take for granted. You know, the meetings were in person or on the phone.
Yeah.
It was a very different thing.
Did you feel like with that particular win, Diane, you mentioned Bill before and people saying you got a soft landing. Did you feel in some part that you didn't receive not the respect you deserve, but part of it, of your win was diminished by that? Or did you just hunker down, blinkers on, and just push on?
No, because when we sold, we thought that was the end. So I was just enormously proud of Bill, who had created this from nothing. And, you know, I mean, not many people, even today, you know, he had factories all over the world. He had marketing offices through Europe and Asia. I mean, people just dream of that stuff now. 30 years ago, it was unheard of. So I had enormous pride in him and what he'd created. And I was pretty happy with myself for concluding the deal. But it was about us. And you see, we sold Trigon, and then the next day we bought a boat and we decided to sail around the world. So it was only when we were on that journey that I got this deep-seated thing, I need to do more. So at the actual time of the sale, it was jubilation. And there's also this, I love to tell the story that we were driving in separate cars across the bridge on the way to sign the deal. And I just had this really strange feeling that I didn't want to sign it because it was like selling your children and your baby. And Bill obviously had the same feeling. And we parked our car, and I don't know how, it was almost intuition. And we parked behind each other and stood on the side of the road saying, do we really want to do this?
Wow.
So, when you're doing a deal like that, there's a lot of sadness too, because you've grown this for so long. And so it was a tinge with sadness, but also excitement that we were packing the kids off and going on a new adventure the very next day.
It's probably not a good admission, but I'd sell a child for 130 million. I'd sell one of your children for 130 million.
I'd sell you for $1,000,000.
It's a really weird feeling, and you walk out that door and it's not yours anymore. And I talk about this in relation to me selling the ice cream company, Emerald Foods. That was one of the weirdest things because that deal was 2 years in gestation. So that's as long as an elephant's pregnant. And I was actually in Monte Carlo when the deal came through, and the people had been so hard to deal with. He was Chinese, language barriers, culture barriers, and I didn't really know if he wanted it. And we'd had 4 deadlines as to, pay up or no, pay up or no. And I was in Monte Carlo. I spoke to my CEO and I said, deal is off. We can't, it's been 2 years. He's been screwing us around. We're just going to run this business as though it's our own. And when I went to bed that night, he paid the money into my bank account. So I went to bed thinking I still owned Emerald Foods and the ice cream empire. And I woke up with a healthier bank account. Those things are quite odd. They sound exciting when you're talking about them anecdotally, but when you're living them, there's always these kind of mixture of feelings.
Yeah. Do you so when you wake up and you look at that, because you obviously, you had a fair bit of coin before that, does it make, is the money the driving force, or is it
No.
something else?
I think that money is important. I don't care what anybody says.
Oh, of course.
I have so many arguments. People say to me, it's not about the money. It's always about the money.
Of course.
There's money in every human transaction. That's what life is about. But what having money does, it gives you choice.
Yep.
And that's what I love about it. And I don't have, I don't have a helicopter. I don't have a private jet. I don't have real money, and especially in today's terms, but I'm secure and I'm comfortable. But I think that it's absolutely not about anything except having the ability to have choices.
Yeah, I
love that I can choose.
I think you're being a bit modest there, Diane. I'm pretty sure you could, you could have run a helicopter every now and then if you like. Like, come on, don't be stupid. But
I think you're being a bit tight. You're being a bit tight there.
No, my passion is houses.
There
I can't
you
even
go.
run an iPad, so
I
think
I'll join the club.
terrible behind. Yeah.
You're good at scooping ice cream because referencing New Zealand Natural, I don't know if Matthew knows this, but you expanded that to over 700 outlets globally, which is enormous. And 19 of those, I believe, were in Saudi Arabia, which to me is an interesting sort of segue in itself. A businesswoman, leader in a country like Saudi Arabia. What was that like?
Well, it's kind of a really weird experience because, of course, I'm not actually scooping the ice cream. I'm not actually there opening new territories. It's really hard to describe, but, I'm kind of at the head of the totem pole and there's many people between me and the actual country. But how I personally ended up in Saudi was I was a judge for World Entrepreneur of the Year, and EY, who ran the competition, asked me if I would be prepared to go to Saudi and give a lecture to Saudi business people about entrepreneurship. And that's quite a scary experience because it was about 15 years ago, going to Riyadh, having to wear the burqa. I was traveling with my then boyfriend. We weren't married. And so we thought, God, are we going to get stoned? There was, and I don't mean the bad kind of stoned, I mean the rock kind of stoned. So it was very, very scary. But the most amazing thing was that I knew I had stores, obviously, and I was hoping to do store visits after the speech. But I did the presentation. And again, that's the oddest feeling because, and I don't know if it's the same today, but the room's segregated. So you've got a wall between the men and the women. And that's strange to even address a presentation. And I found the women asked some really good questions, and the men just looked grumpy. But then the thing that was kind of interesting was that I came out of the presentation and I realized that the conference room was above a mall, and I went downstairs in the mall, and straight under the elevator was a New Zealand natural store. That was weird.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't expecting it. And I walked in, and of course I don't speak Saudi, and they sure as hell didn't know who I was. And so I took out my business card and showed them. And I think they were it was a very weird experience. But, I sometimes use my kids as models in ice cream cream shots. And in that store, there were 3 of my children as models for New Zealand Natural.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah, that was cool. And another one of those experiences was with Trigon, going to Iceland and going supermarket shopping in Iceland and finding Trigon packaging around lamb in Iceland.
Yeah.
They're the experiences that money can't buy.
Yeah, exactly. And then,
just cool things.
Yeah, that's amazing. Diane, what do you think? Like, obviously, you've had a huge career in business and a long career. What's it like being a woman in business now? Well, back then, as opposed, and then during the time that you've been in business, what have the changes been like? And obviously, you've seen many changes.
Yeah, phenomenal. Perhaps I should give you a little story that when Bill first put me on the Trigon board, there'd never been a woman on the board. They were horrified. You can imagine these elderly gentlemen sitting around a board table 35, 40 years ago, and the company chairman says, my new blonde third wife, who's barely out of her 20s, is going to come and join our board. They were just horrified. I knew all of these people because obviously we'd entertain them at home, but I went to shake all their hands and none of them would shake hands with me.
Wow.
It was just so terrible. They were, what the hell is he doing? Why has he got her here? What does she bring to this?
Wow.
It was really difficult. And I was so unnerved by the whole experience that I'd said to Bill on the car going down, because I'd never been in a boardroom or been to a board meeting. And when I say going down, we were going down to our head office in Hamilton. And I said, what do you do when you want to go to the loo? And I said, you put your hands up? He said, I don't know, just do what the others do. I just watched what the others did. But the weird thing was that I went to the loo, and while I was in the loo, because it was in the female toilets at the plant, but there'd never been a woman use them before because there'd never been anyone there. And so there were no lights, no soap. It was just absolutely appalling. And when I came to leave, the handle of the door came off in my hand. And so I had to dry my hands with my skirt, take my skirt off, dry my hands, screw the handle on. When I got back to the boardroom, I found out years later they thought they'd scared me off and I was crying in the car. But actually I was locked in the loo, so it really is bad.
I thought you were going to say they loosened the handle to set you up and keep you in there.
Oh, probably. But my point is, that's what it was like. I was the most unwelcome human being in history, and they didn't want me, made it really clear they didn't want me, didn't respect me, and it was hard. It's not like that now.
One thing that this brings me to is something that we've been excited about having you here to talk about, you being a woman in business, because Matthew and I get a bit of flack. We like to sort of discuss and look into all sorts of various issues and topics, and obviously that includes speaking about women and how women fit in, and we do get in trouble every now and then for speaking for women, which I understand, but there's a level of empathy that allows you to put yourself in other people's shoes, but to have you here allows us, I would like to think, to sort of investigate that a little more thoroughly.
Yeah, go deep, feel free.
Yeah, well, I think it's awesome that women are in business and all that sort of stuff because they're creative, they're amazing. They're just like guys, let's be honest. So they're go-getters. But there's also, in my opinion, and from women that I've spoken to, there's a lot of women that just would like to be at home and raise their children, and are fortunate enough to be at home and raise their children because their husband earns enough money to be a single family home, which is rare in itself. But in my opinion, and I think there's a lot of women feel like this, is that it's kind of frowned upon now. Like you're not adding to society.
So wrong.
You were saying, but do you get that? Do you get that feeling though?
Yeah.
Do you get? Is that something?
I love the fact that women can choose. They don't have to be one or the other. And I think it's really great that if a woman wants to be at home, then that's as equally as important as doing the stuff I've done. Because let's face it, they're probably going to bring up really well-rounded, grounded, great kids because of the efforts they're putting in. So I think we should never, ever denigrate women being at home. I think every family's unique. Every relationship's unique. And we should, I hate judgment. So just as people wanted to judge me for being, a working mum, I would never judge a stay-at-home mum, because if that's working for her family, that's brilliant.
Yeah,
and I think that's
100%.
part of it all. Judgment is a really bad thing.
It's really interesting and telling, Diane. This particular subject, we got a bit of a lashing over because we touched on it a week or two ago, and we did a little poll online, and we had a couple of thousand people reply to it. Mm-hmm. And the question was effectively, should women feel ashamed of,
or debased, or not worthy, or
because
not
a lot
good
of women
enough,
do for choosing to stay at home, because many women that we know feel like that. 80% of the responders said absolutely not. 20% said yes. And this is the interesting thing. Of that 20%, all were women.
Isn't that really interesting?
Yeah.
See, this whole judgment thing I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Women are other women's harshest critic.
Yeah.
Women often think that men are the enemy. I think women are women's enemies. Women are so judgy and
jealous. Jealous. Yeah, it's
men,
just so weird.
I like to surround myself. I know I'll probably go down in a screaming heap for this, but
Thank God we've got the camera on.
Yeah, I really like to surround myself with male executives because it's much cleaner. Yep. Women need a lot more. They need a lot more love, and I probably don't love them as much as they should, as a senior executive should. Men are very straightforward, whereas women tend to judge other women very harshly. And that just takes me back to my Saudi experience. The great thing about working with those women in Saudi was people are so horrified at their buyer. But you know what? Underneath it all, they had the best designer gear. And they said, we actually quite like their buyer because we can't judge. You're just looking in my eyes. And so you make much deeper friendships.
Wow.
Just a thought.
And so when you sorry, I'll just jump in. When you come across another woman in business, is it a peacock off? Do you find does it get
women, who's got the biggest diamonds, who's got the best clothes, all of that is like a millisecond that you're thinking, where do I rate? I don't know if men do this, but women, they're immediately sizing the opposition up and they're thinking, where do I rate? It's great being old now because I don't have to play any of games. I just know I'm old. And it's really nice to be able to say to a beautiful young 20-year-old in a fantastic outfit, you look amazing. You look beautiful. I love you or whatever. Yeah. But when I was 40 or 45, I would never say that. I'd feel intimidated. But
that's
now
so funny.
It's so good to put your arm around another girl or woman and say, you're cool.
Yeah.
But I think you've got to get past being in the game. But I think when you're in the game, you are competitive, definitely.
That's really interesting you say that because I do that with guys and girls, if I see a dude that's like whatever, I'm like, hey bro, you're looking good today. I think it's really nice to, if somebody's made an effort or you're impressed by them or just, you think they've got some swagger. I may not even know them, but I'll just go, hey bro, looking good, and they get a hit and you get a hit. I
was going to say the hit you get back is equally amazing because you just feel so cool that you've made someone else's day. But when you're fighting for your place in the sort of female hierarchical structure, I'm not quite sure whether I would have been as generous.
Yeah.
Do you think, Diane, to achieve the lofty heights that you have as a woman, is there a degree to which you had to sacrifice your feminine side?
Yep.
We spoke the other day about, appearance, the importance of it. Do you have to become more masculine? You've never done that. You've always been very feminine in appearance, groomed, great outfits, great accessories. And you said to me, you thought of those things as almost like donning armor going into war or battle. Yeah,
well, I believe whether you're male or female, you need to dress for success. And of course, in the day, that would mean a business suit for a woman or a man, and that would be really serious stuff. I mean, now, who would wear a tie to work? You'd feel like a complete loser. But so it's not about that, but it's still about being well-groomed. It's about being respectful of the position. I think COVID was a bit hard for that because we were all in our sweatpants on Zooms, and it's kind of been hard to get out of the sweatpants. But I think that it's really important to be respectful. Your clothes and how you present yourself is what people see is, I always say, I represent my brand. So if I'm looking like the back end of a bus, my brand's looking like the back end of a bus. You've got to respect what you're trying to portray.
Did you have to sacrifice any of that feminine side of you, or?
One of the things I found that I didn't like about myself was that I got a very foul mouth. And working in factories particularly, when you've got a few hundred men working for you, you're going to use some pretty rash and bad expletives. And it was only when I married my current husband, Paul, he said to me, "You realise you've got a potty mouth?" Which, if you know Paul, he's got the biggest potty mouth in town. But it was such a terrible thing that he said to me, and I've had to really work to lose that and understand that I had made myself quite hard and tough to fight that fight, but not because I was trying to be bigger or better, but because I just wanted to fit in.
That's it. Like males do tend to swear a lot, right? And you really notice it. Like we were talking about it the other day. Like you do notice when somebody swears now. Do you know? Like we've actually, we've actually, and I think it's a skill not to swear because it's just so prevalent in our society, right? And I'm terrible at it.
Well, I don't think you've dropped one F1 yet, which would be bring first. So
I'll take it as
full respect, Diane.
Yeah, I'm feeling it. I can tell you, it's great. No, but it's been a real learning for me to look back and think, God, I wasn't a particularly nice person, and I think I became very tough because you have to be. You're making big decisions when you've got a lot of noughts, and it's not just the noughts. You're always thinking about the jobs, the people. All those people that you employ, they've got families, they've got responsibilities. So you can't just walk in and say, let's make 20 people redundant. There's a sense of ownership for their lives.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think that does toughen you up.
Matthew mentioned before, Diane, that in his opinion, men and women, basically we're all the same, right? And I think there's a definite narrative in this day and age that we are, and there's no difference between us.
Well, other than physicality.
Of course.
Yeah,
but
of course.
What I'd love to hear from in a woman in a position like Diane's is, do you see some differences, in fact, between men and women in that arena?
Good question. Well, of course, I have to keep going back to I'm pretty prehistoric. So I'm not working in the current arena, but when I do touch in it, I don't see there's a lot of differences. I think the things I always dreamed about have come true. Women are completely equal with men. They're doing the same job. They're getting the same pay. It's pretty amazing. But women do have a different way of doing it. And I've always said the best way to have a good business is to have diversity of thought. And so you need all ethnicities, you need all genders, because everybody brings their own perspective. So, a good company is quite homogenized in that you bring as much of it as you can together. And I just think that's a wonderful thing. I am the least woke person you're ever going to meet, but I think that wokeness has brought that, which is fantastic. We're all realizing that everyone's perspective is useful.
And I think perspective is one of the greatest things that you can have. Like when you change your perspective, or you can listen to somebody else's perspective, that's when you get probably the best result, right? Because nobody knows everything. It takes
absolutely. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes more than a village to create a really good business. It takes cool people doing cool things, aligned, going in the same direction. And I just don't like thinking, is this a man or is this a woman? Because it doesn't matter. I always want the very best person for the role. I've never, ever been gender specific. As I said earlier, I prefer to work with men because they're a lot less complicated. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't hire a woman. I've hired thousands. But you hire the best person always.
Yeah, I think the DEI has given itself a bad rap in this day and age because there's been so much box ticking. It's not been merit-based.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
And I think that's wrong. wrong. In every single situation, it's got to be the best person, not the yellow person or the green person. It's the best person. And, and I see that in a lot of family businesses where they promote their kids. And I'm constantly saying, but is, little Johnny the best person to do this job? Is that the very best person in the universe you can get? Because, you've got to have, I want to be gender, non-binary. I want to be all of those things blind. I want to be skill specific.
Well, it's almost like going back to the reference you made about the woman in the abaya. All you can see is the eyes,
Yeah.
There's no other reference point to go on. Sort of sticking with the theme of gender, and another popular thing that's been around for a long time actually is this concept of women having it all. And I'd be interested to hear your views on that with regards to the fact that you've built businesses, you've been a single mother, you're a stepmother, all of these things. Without going into your personal life, what does balance look like and mean for you? And can women have it all?
I don't think anyone can have it all. Again, I think that's being binary, because none of us have got it all. I mean, I've got, all my guy friends, I don't think they'd say they've got it all. Life is about compromise. So no, you can't have it all. But it's not that you can't have it all because you're a woman. It's you can't have it all because you're a person. And, we've all got stuff that we wish we could do that we can't do. Like I haven't got my helicopter. But, we've got
yet. Come on.
Yeah, we can't.
You're just kidding me.
Yeah, I'm living.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's, again, it's a bit sexist to say, can women have it all? Can men have it all? No one can have it all. And we're all juggling. People have got kids and responsibilities, and I love the way that people do this now. You work a week, I'll work a week, or whatever, and they make it work. And I think that's so important.
It's quite a freeing way to frame it, isn't it? No, you can't. Not because you're this or you're that, just because you're a freaking human.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a human. There's no such thing as having it all. And so, once you realise that, you're happy with what you've got.
I love that for us.
Me too. So, Diane, you obviously, when you were raising your children and you were like working your tail off, how did you find that? Like, how was it juggling like, a corporate life and then, raising 4 kids?
Look, I think I did a really poor job. I think I did a good job of the corporate stuff. I think I did a poor job as a mother. And one of the analogies one of my adult daughters said to me once was, Mum, when it was my birthday and a chocolate cake arrived and you were in Uzbekistan, I would have liked you there baking the chocolate cake, not ordering it from Uzbekistan. And I think that is really telling. You can't have it all. And my children would say that the business got all of me and they got a very small percentage. And that's, if I had to do it again, I would change that. I would try and bring more balance into it.
Isn't that really interesting? But, you obviously threw yourself into it and that sort of stuff. And, but, there's pros
I'm
and
trying
cons.
to make up for it. Yeah, I'm trying to make up for it now. But, you can't get those years back.
Exactly.
Going back to your earlier point, that's why I'm so non-judgy of people that can make it work by staying at home and being great parents. Because I've got a feeling, going to raise some pretty cool kids.
Yeah, that's so. It's really interesting that, because like I spend a lot of time with my children. That's why I jump up. We've got my 2 kids are here now. So, and I feel really privileged that I can spend so much time with my children. Obviously I'm not in like a businessman or a businesswoman like you are, but the trade off is that I get to spend really good quality time with my kids. So you can't have it all, eh? Like if you're like,
no, you can't.
If you're a corporate person and you're running big business and you've got loads of zeros on the end of each deal, you just don't have the time, right? So
no, you don't. And something has to go. And, excuse me. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. But yeah, and I think in my life, my children definitely suffered.
Yeah, and so how do you think that they, do you have conversations about that? And
a lot.
Yeah.
We talk about it a lot, and I try and make it better, but you can never get it back.
Yeah. So is there a little bit of like
resentment?
Resentment, yeah.
Yeah, I would think so. I think so. Yeah. I always tried to sell it to them and to me. Hey, but we get really cool trips. You can come to Disneyland with me, or we can do this and that. But actually, it's not the cool trips that they want. No. They do want you making the chocolate cake.
Yeah, and they want your time. They want your time.
And they want your time. Time is so precious. One of the tricks that I did learn, though, was traveling with one child at a time.
Yes.
Because when you try and take a flock of children, that's really hard. But that one-on-one special time when you take one child, and, I've taken kids into boardrooms, we've done ice cream stores around the world, but they just love the fact that at night we're in a hotel and we snuggle into bed together and get room service. So you can try, but it took me a long time to realize that a child can be quite a fun accessory.
And the other thing too is with that is like, when you take away 3 or 4 kids at a time, there's no enjoyment, right? It's just you're just like, when you take 2 kids, there's no enjoyment. Well, there is, but like when you take one at a time, it's so good.
It's just so unbelievably cool. That one-on-one is really special.
Yes.
So Paul, my husband now, is in the States at the moment with my 10-year-old granddaughter, my 10-year-old granddaughter.
Wow. Yeah.
And he's taken my granddaughter on a one-on-one experience to America. I mean, that's the sort of stuff you can't ever do.
Exactly.
When you're taking a try. And their relationship will be so cool for this experience.
And that's what I was just going to touch that word that you said, experience. See, for me, my motto is life is about experience, so it's more than, like amassing stuff and, having money in the bank and all that sort of stuff. Like as soon as I get it, I'm like, okay, I'm all for the experience, like I'm going to see if I can go and do this, this and this, because in the end, you can't take it with you, right? So
no. And, again, that gets back to why I believe in not selling time. Because if you're selling time, yes, you're a professional. Yes, you can have those 6 cool weeks a year off. But if you've got a business, you get this chunk of cash that you've earned, and then you can go and do cool things and have those experiences and keep having them until, until that expiry date comes.
Yeah, unless we live till 120, I get why you're worried about it. I get why you're worried about it. You might run out, but I think your spending habits are a bit more excessive than ours.
Well, that's why you've also got to think about future security too, right? You can be spending your next paycheck or whatever on having wonderful experiences, but money is security.
Yeah, but it's a balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I mentor so many young people that come to me because they get into trouble. And the first thing they always tell me is they haven't paid their tax, they haven't paid their GST, and they haven't paid their ACC. Well, that's just plain dumb, because in the next breath they'll tell me about this really amazing trip they've just been on to Thailand.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, you've got to understand that with responsibility, with privilege comes responsibility. Owning a business and employing people is a privilege. You have a responsibility. So it's all about that balance.
But you've got to have that Instagram feed looking good, Diane.
That's really important.
That generation, it's crazy how important that is.
Drives me nuts. Yeah. I mean, I'm not on any social media, so as you could tell. So, and I really love that because I'm not driven by anything.
Yeah. Coming back to your mentoring, which you reference, helping younger people, that's an enormous part of your makeup, isn't it? And you talk about how important it is lifting other people up, and specifically you reference leaving the ladder down.
Yeah, I think that's happened now. When I was making those comments, it was in a book I wrote in 2009. And I thought then it was so important not only to leave the ladder down, but to actually go back down that ladder and pull a few women up behind you. Because, of course, women tend to bring the ladder up behind them.
Yeah.
But I think that over time that ladder is staying down. Really great women have climbed up, so it's just not a deal anymore. It's all about, and I've kind of changed my views now, because it's not just about women. It's about empowering everybody. Women don't need any extra preferential seats at the table. We are all the same. So don't turn it into apartheid by saying you're a woman, so you're special. Join a club. We're all the same, and we all don't need any preferential treatment. And I know it's easy for me to say that sitting where I sit, but anybody can kind of do this. But I say that when I was very lucky to have met Bill and parachuted into such a cool position. But you can tell me stories. I can tell you stories of people that have had a lot worse situations than mine, that have, by dint of hard work, have been able to do amazing things. So
Yeah, but
I really don't.
Sorry.
I really don't think women need the ladder left down anymore.
But the other thing is, so Diane, is like when you say you got parachuted in that position, if you didn't have the ability, Bill wouldn't have, no. So you didn't get parachuted into that position. You were just really fortunate that that you met and fell in love with a guy and it started high, and then you just picked up the ball and you ran with it, right? So and he obviously noted, he obviously realised that Jesus, he was lucky. Like,
well, I think we were.
You were both lucky,
really
lucky,
but but what I say is he gave me a great stage, but I was able to dance on it. And when it goes, so that goes back to your earlier question, whether it's genetic or whether it's you can be taught. I think I learnt a lot at his feet, but I think I did have an innate sense of wanting to do this stuff.
Yeah.
But when you're living with a fantastic mentor 24/7, it's a pretty good experience.
So can I ask, because I haven't delved into that, did Bill get sick or did he?
Yeah, he started, he worked unbelievably hard. And so in his late 60s, he had multiple strokes. So it meant that he wasn't able to work anymore. And that's, of course, one of the terrible things. You work really hard, but your body takes the toll. So it gets back to that balance that I talked about earlier.
So in those days, were people like taking care of their health and their fitness and, because nowadays, there was no going to the gym. There was none of that stuff, right?
No. I mean, Bill was unbelievably fit and he ran every day on the beach and wherever we travelled. He had this, I always think this is a great tip to tell people. He never left a hotel room without a $100 note in his sock because he always thought that if he was mugged, nobody's going to take his socks off so he could get back. And so he was always thinking about, the next problem. I always tell people, make sure you've got enough money to call a cab in your sock. But
it's a good point.
Because phone's probably going to be, I live in Chelsea in London, so my phone's probably going to be nabbed.
Exactly.
It's kind of, but no, in those days, people generally, the gym wasn't important. It was the 3 gins before dinner, not the gym before dinner. And it's just different now. People really look after themselves more, really conscious about what you eat.
Yes.
In those days, we used to have a tea lady that used to bring our lunch round to us on a silver trolley. And, it would be calorific and chocolate log and anything you could think of. Because you couldn't get out of your office. People would bring you unbelievable amounts of food.
Those days are gone now, aren't they?
Thank goodness, it's great. But we did really harmful things to ourselves.
I was going to follow up our conversation about mentoring and ask you the best piece of advice for young female entrepreneurs, which is redundant now. It should be for just entrepreneurs. What would that be?
Yeah. Well, it's exactly where we started. Don't sell time. Start a business. Doesn't matter how small. Find out something where you can work on the business. So many entrepreneurs or business people, they work in the business and they're out there and they're sweating it and they're doing it every day. Take some time out to work on it. Once you've decided business is for you, then you can't, you write it down, write a business plan, because if it's not written down, if you're not following it's like trying to make a meal without a menu or make something without a recipe.
A recipe.
I think that, your recipe for a good business is writing a business plan, because it goes from being a dream to something you're actually following the steps. You think of a Gordon Ramsay recipe, you get the steps. Well, business is the same. You get the steps. So the first step is to write a business plan, know where you're headed. And, one of the lines I use, if you don't know where you want to go, any road will get you there. So, you got to know, you got to know where you want to go, because you're going to end up nowhere if you don't.
Exactly.
So write it down, stop dreaming, get yourself a really good mentor, someone that you trust implicitly, and work together and, tap their brain.
Can I ask one last question?
Sure.
Do you have do you have anything that you feel like you haven't achieved, or do you have any regrets? I know that's a tough question.
My biggest regret is not being a better parent. And, that's why I think it's very cool talking to you, Matthew, and hearing your kids in the background and thinking,
that's why I've been jumping up, running around like,
I get it.
Shut the fridge door. Shut the door.
Be quiet. I'm working.
Yeah.
It's not being a parent. That's my biggest regret. But no,
I had a feeling that would be.
Yeah, if I could do it all again, I would. It's been an absolute privilege.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
We hope you're around for a hell of a lot longer. Like, that's the thing. Like, we're all living longer as well, aren't we? That's pretty scary. Yeah, me too.
I don't think it is. Amazing opportunity. Here if we get another 20 or 30 years, isn't it great? How are we going to spend them?
That was going to be my question. I was going to say, what is next for Diane Foreman? Is it sort of wheels off and jetting off into the sunset, or is it time to put the armour back on and get back into battle?
If a really good opportunity came my way and I didn't have to bet the whole farm, I'd be out there.
Okay.
I'd absolutely love it. I would love some really good governance roles. The crazy thing is I've never been asked to be on anything, on any of those kind of corporate boards.
Really?
They don't want entrepreneurs. Yeah, no, weird. Hey,
you're joking.
Yeah. No, they don't want entrepreneurs. That's I find that really strange, because when I came out of the last big business, I thought, I'm going to be, swamped with board offers. It just hasn't happened.
So that must be a little bit of a that would be like kind of hurt you, kick in the backside and hurt your ego a little bit. It's like, hey, why aren't they asking me? I completely
I thought
get
they'd be queued up, but that hasn't happened.
That's quite telling, though, isn't it? I mean, you were named by Forbes as one of Asia's most powerful women. Who wouldn't want to take advantage of that?
Funnily enough, nobody does.
And isn't that weird, though? Because there'd be other women as well. There's obviously other women that are on boards in New Zealand, I don't know, that don't have anywhere near the success that you've had, right? And they're just, excuse me, but they're corporate people, they've grown up in the corporate world. They're working for businesses or for other companies. They're employees, right? Right?
Yeah, and so someone like me is scary. People probably don't want to take a risk on someone like me because I've probably talked too much, and they just don't want to do it. It's been a real shock, because I thought that was where I was headed. I imagined 4 or 5 really senior board roles, few chairmanships. I could knock this off before breakfast, but I haven't had an opportunity. So that's a regret. I wish I'd kind of prepared myself more for that. So it gets back to, I've got to work for me because I'm a boss that trusts me. So if a great opportunity came my way, yes, I'd do it.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Quite ready. I'm not quite ready to put on the slippers yet.
Yeah, no, good on you.
And let's hope you don't regret coming on this podcast.
No, I don't think you will.
I'm sure I won't. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you guys. I hope
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Diane. Awesome.
Bye, Diane.
Bye. Bye.